Welcome to the Femininja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the Femininja Project. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Femininja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you. And today we're going to talk about overcoming obstacles as well as healing and recovery. And our guest is a lovely and brilliant young lady. Her name is Jaye. She is a professional photographer. She is also an artist who specializes in painting, drawing, and jewelry design. She has also expanded her professional reach into spiritual intuitive counseling, Reiki, and energy healing. Laura, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
It is so nice to be here. So thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted.
Oh, I'm delighted to have you here. From the very first time, I don't know how we connected. I think it actually was online. I saw you somewhere and we decided we had to become friends, had a phone call, and I think we talked for an hour and a half. And
we did.
Yeah, I'm surprised we're still not talking. But I guess I had to have you on the show. You have an amazing story. And I'm just going to turn it over to you and say, okay, tell us your story.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, no, I just have to say it's been a delight to get to know you too. And I think your podcast is a beautiful reflection of your spirit and your ability to connect with people. So congratulations for everything that you're doing here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and it's an honor to be able to share my story. Honestly, very few people know the whole background of my story, but it definitely influences how I approach my work. It influences my goals. It influences how I live, and it definitely helps me create a certain kind of vision for how I want to respond to life. And I will just preface by saying that, my story does include trauma. It does include disturbing accounts of trauma. I'm not going to go into full-fledged details about that, but I just like people to know that this is a subject area that we're going into, so that they have some preparation. I was raised here in Colorado, and I grew up in an upper middle class family on a nice street. Everything looked great on the outside, right? Usually does, and sometimes it doesn't. But in this situation, there weren't a lot of things that my friends understood about what was happening or society understood. There were things happening behind closed doors with every single one of my family members. My mother has some really significant mental health challenges, possibly stemming from her own trauma with her family, which resulted in her really using violence, manipulation, and death threats, verbal abuse, calling me names, blaming things on me, from the very get-go. I have just to kind of explain that, I have two memories when I was very young. One was when I was 2. And as I was doing the work later and processing this, I just have to, by the way, commend how brilliant our brains are, because we can store certain information. And when you're at different ages and you experience different types of abuse, your body can only understand and comprehend it in a certain way. So it's taken me a lot of years to really unpack everything that happened in my house. And it's something that I'm still working on today. I still work with a therapist, 25 years later. So this is an ongoing process. But going back to the memory, I had a memory when I was 2 and there was something I had done, and obviously at that age, I can't comprehend it. But what I do remember was the feeling of my mom taking the little dress I was wearing and pulling me up by the neck as if trying to hang me with it. And then my father standing there. And if it wasn't for him and stuff, she may have committed that act of murder. And then fast forward to when I was 4, there was an incident in the bathtub. And what I can inherently remember is like, I wasn't doing something she wanted me to do. And so I could feel that anger. But the next thing you know, I'm underwater and being held underwater, and I can't breathe, and I'm panicking and I'm flailing, and I see my father come in over her shoulder, and I see this commotion through the water. And then next thing you know, I'm lifted out and I'm put on the ground. And but I disassociated from my body. And so, and I could almost see, it's like my body was like drifting up to the ceiling as I was looking at myself. And, so those are just some of the early examples. And, my dad was good at protecting us for a certain period of time, but then there was one final incident, and I'll just reflect on this briefly, is, my brother and I were kids. It was summer in Colorado. We wanted to go outside. I had a pogo ball that was calling my name. And I'm like, I just want to go outside. Okay, I'll go eat because mom makes me eat. Okay, fine, that's great. But I really want to go outside and play. And so once dinner was coming to a close, she had asked us, like, okay, who's going to volunteer to do the dishes? And she looked at my brother and I expectantly, and neither one of us were volunteering. I looked out at him out of the corner of my eye, and he had his head down looking at his plate, kind of like trying to ignore what was going on. And I'm like, I'm not going to volunteer. I really got to get outside again. And but the next thing you know, my mom is raging. She's screaming and talking about how she does everything, and we don't appreciate her. And then the next scene, it's like things kind of jumped around. There's certain pieces of those scenes that held with me. And next thing you know, my brother and I are cowering behind our dad, and the doorway's in front of us. Our dad is in between us and the door, and she's in between my dad and the door, and she's holding a knife, screaming, I'm going to kill your children. And just terrified. And I just remember clutching his shirt, or his jeans or something, and just looking out from behind him and stuff, just my eyes wide and terrified. And she ended up, he was holding his arms out to protect us so that she couldn't get near us, and we were backed up against the wall. And finally it just, she just gave up, and she dropped the knife, and she grabbed her purse, and she ran out the door and got in her car and drove away. And we had many nights like that, many experiences. My mom would go on this rage, and then she would just stop and start crying and run away. And so, but that particular day was important because, I come up to my dad, and he was holding his head in his hands and rubbing his eyes the way he would after these types of escalations. And I just touched his shoulder with my hand, and I said, Dad, I'm sorry. And he said, you should have volunteered to do the dishes. And that was the last time that I remember my dad protecting me. And that's just how that went. There were these escalations as we're growing older. My brother, I saw my mom break a wooden spoon on my brother's back. And as I got older and bigger, and would try and, reason with her, argue with her, like, I didn't put that mug on the second shelf, like I wasn't doing it to make you mad. And, but it always resulted in some kind of life threat, being beaten, being told I was a horrible, bitch, and that kind of stuff. So that was the extent with my mom. And then when my brother left to college, it was just me, her, and my dad. And so when I'm in high school and I'm taller than her, finally, it just continued to escalate. So I ran away from home a lot, but I never actually had the help from my friends or family either. And that's something that, I'm just now starting to realize, that when you see signs, when you have a child in your home who's crying and weeping and desolate and despairing, that's the time to ask questions. That's the time to hold them and say, what is going on? And I think that my parents were master manipulators, and they're really good liars, because when they would send me away to a friend's house for de-escalations or cooling off periods, or I would run away and they would get in contact with them, none of those parents ever asked me what was going on, ever. And I was always made to go home. So my senior year in high school, and I'll get into other pieces of the trauma as we go, I'm kind of relaying it, in terms of my process of like what I was consciously dealing with on the forefront, until things finally change. And my senior year of high school, we'd gone through some other events, and the summer prior, after me being gone for 5 weeks, and then I was captain of the swim team, I dropped off because I was living at home again, and I'd started smoking and drinking, and I didn't want my coach to find out. So I was like, forget this. So then, but there was an incident before Christmas, my senior year, and where I actually tried to kill myself. And it was based on one of these horrible escalations and or things that my mom said. And then I just snapped and slashed my wrist in the kitchen, and wouldn't let anyone come near me. And they took me to the hospital, and then a teen psych ward. And it was there that I actually got validated for, well, there are a couple of times when I did get some validation, and I'm actually working on a book right now. So, we'll see if it ends up being published or not. But right now it's more of a process, but the doctor there, Dr. Scott, had said, Laura, like, you don't belong in here. Your mom does, and I'm not letting you leave until they find you someplace else to live. And so that was my story of getting out of that house. But I was a kid still. I was so messed up. My dad found a place for me to go is with a piano teacher from when I was in elementary school, and her husband like welcomed me with open arms, and their role is to be like, okay, Laura, like get back on the horse. Like we agreed to let you stay here. Your parents still need to send you to college. Like that's so crucial for you. And so let's just get back on the horse and let's just keep moving forward. But, I don't think they comprehended the full reality of my person or my being at that time. I was severely bulimic. I just tried to commit suicide. I started to dive into drugs and drinking a lot more then. And so that kind of like started this other cascade of problems. But I have to say, these things that we pick up that are, they're tools, right? And they're tools to help us cope and help us get through and stuff until they become filled with cement, and then they don't work anymore, and then they start to take us down. So what happened is that, my parents, I got into one of the top art schools in the country, and my dad was committed to sending me to that. They agreed to do that on a loan. They gave me a loan basis so I could go with a small amount of gifted money. And so I went to college and I loved it there. And I was completely immature. I was such a broken like kid, but man, being around my fellow artists and like making art all the time, staying up till 2 a.m. every night making art, it was like the dream come true. But at the end of the year, my parents wanted me to come back and live with them again. And I couldn't do that. I was not going to do that by any means. And so they ended up cutting me off from school. And so the Wilsons shipped me home, and they got me emancipated through another university local. And I tried to be normal and I just couldn't. And, fast forward, a couple of years later, I finally begged my parents to help me again because I didn't like the school I was at. I went from a top school to this other school and it didn't fit. So I agreed to move home with them, and I stayed with her. I smoked pot in the car so I could have conversations with my mom in the kitchen. I just remember her being so delighted that I would have conversations. And I'm like, I'm high as heck here. I'm like, and I could just smile and nod. But that kind of, started the process for going back to school. And so I went back to the same school. My friends were seniors. And so I started out in the sophomore class. But then what happened is the drinking caught up with me finally. And after several weekends of that, I'd started seeing a therapist who was very alternative type of healer. She was incredible. And she could actually like read like memories in your body, because I would have like bones pop out of nowhere. And she was trying to help me start to process this trauma. But she had told me 6 months earlier that, Laura, if you don't get help for AA, after I showed up for therapy at 9 a.m. thinking I was sober, but I had only stopped drinking at 5 and gotten 2 hours of sleep, and I passed the 20 question test. She's like, you need to get sober, right? Like, you're not going to move forward if you can't get sober. And I was like, I'm not ready yet. So I had to go through some more pain before that moment back in November, when I was finally willing to be like, okay, the common denominator right now for me is it's not my parents, it's the alcohol. So I have to do something different. And that's when I got sober. And, I think that is what really started off this journey of healing for me. It was like, you got to get rid of the things that are clouding the mind and stuff too, so that the body can actually heal. And it wasn't an easy process, and it hasn't been an easy process by any means. But there's a principle that I learned early on in sobriety, which is carried forth with me. And that is, in the preamble of AA, they talk about, we get sober so that we can help other alcoholics get sober too. And the reason why this is so important is because when you've gone through something that is tragic, is painful, that causes suffering, right? You get put into this unique position where you can actually help other people out of the ditches, because you know exactly what it feels like to be there. You can gain their trust. Right. And then what I also learned in AA too, is I started to do the work, is that working with other people gets me out of my own head. And that also brings us joy, this inexplicable joy that I can't even fathom. And so that was the foundation. And I kept working with this alternative therapist back in Colorado, and she started helping me. And that's when the PTSD started to emerge. And I started to have experiences and memories of being raped, and I couldn't see the person's face. And mind you, even though I like to make out with boys, right? Like I always froze up when I was with guys during my drinking, and I could never be fully intimate with any of them. So at that point, I thought that I was a virgin. And so, because I was always lucky because I never got raped during my drinking days. But at that point, I started having these memories come up of being raped, and I could feel it was horrible. And it was I would like melt down into a fetal position every time. And I would call my therapist like multiple times per week. She'd walk me through it. She'd help me get back in my body. She'd be like, okay, like look at your surroundings, look at what's around you. What are the colors that you see? Do you have to go to the bathroom? Are you thirsty? Do you need to eat? Like that was the way that she would help me get grounded every single time. And then later on, I also learned other tools too, like martial arts types of, from a martial arts teacher, about how to actually ground and work with my auric field and learn how to work with energy that way. So that was kind of my introduction to the energy work. So what happened was I ended up dropping out of school again because I was suicidal and I'd gone into the hospital, and it was just something that I couldn't cope with at that time. And so I moved back to Colorado and got a job, started doing AA work and doing more therapy, et cetera. And I've had a lot of obstacles, come in this process, and everything from having memory recall of other events and trying to talk to my family about these memories that were coming up of being raped and being like, where did that come from? I don't remember. And they would say, I don't know. But there was one time that I told my dad, I was like, listen, like this happened. And I want to know who it happened with. And he shook his head and he put his head in his hand and he said, I never should have let that happen. And I didn't understand at the time what he meant by that. I was like, I was like, it's not your fault. Like I was thinking a third party, right? A third party. And so, I just had these blips, these moments, and I started doing EMDR work. And the beautiful thing about all the energy work and all the therapy work that I did is that no one ever once put anything into my head. They understand how crucial it was for our bodies, for me to learn how to connect to my body and be able to connect with my truth and whatever's coming up as it's doing it. And they provided a space to do it. They never forced it on me. They never made suggestions, etc. But this is when the stuff started to come up. And then I had the memory of a man who had dark curly hair. And I remembered a woman connected with him with blonde hair. And I remember them being in our house. And that's when the memories of a rape came up with a babysitter. And it was a very disturbing, horrifying scene. It's not something that I will go into here, but it was enough to fragment me into so many pieces that it's taken years for me to be able to pick all those parts up again. And then, later on, I encountered a beautiful Buddhist community and started to chant with them and started to learn how to transform, realize that regardless of what's going on in my life, or these painful things and memories that keep coming up, and trust me, these were coming up over and over the years, like all this stuff that I didn't remember about my childhood. In fact, it wasn't until I was 15 years sober that the memories of my mom trying to drown me or hang me came up. And it's like working with other healers and intuitives who can feel that energy in my body, who can validate that. It's like we can work to process and release it. But one thing that when I encountered this Buddhist community is there's this concept of the bodhisattva of the earth who voluntarily takes on negative human suffering in order to prove the power of the law, right? The power of their own life. And I think the internal message of that is that we have the capability to overcome any kind of situation that we've ever been in, right? Any kind of karmic tendency. And by karmic, I mean patterns or things that have, we get into experiencing over and over again, or things that have become huge struggles for us to handle in our life. And so, when I started looking at that perspective, I was like, well, I can't change my family. Like I can't change my past, but I can work on changing myself. I can make myself stronger in the here and now. I can chant for the right people to be in my life to help me in my healing process. And I feel like the universe was one step ahead of me on that way, because I kept encountering all these beautiful souls and these beautiful women who had spent hours and hours and hours with me, working with me through step work, through deep, stuff, or working with me energetically, or introducing me to different ways of dealing with the body and how the body connects to trauma. And so it's like I almost received like a PhD education just through the experience of all of working with all these different practitioners. And, whether it's acupuncture or it's craniosacral therapy, they all brought something to the table that helped me heal a piece of that trauma in addition to the other stuff I was dealing with. And I definitely don't have a PhD. I would never take that on. But I was like, when I think about these practitioners who are educating, doing so much, I don't want to minimize their efforts there.
Well, I think you have a PhD in the School of Hard Knocks for sure.
Oh, right. Okay, I'll put it on my wall.
Yeah.
Thank you. Will you sign
Not
it too?
one that you would have chosen.
Nope. And that kind of became like a joke too, when I would share with some of my friends and stuff, it's when we talked about like dishing out karma, like I think I was a little bit greedy and I had a really big basket. And I was like, oh, I could totally take that. Like I could take on this too. I could totally take out all this stuff, but it's been an ongoing battle. And just the last piece I'll share two pieces about the trauma stuff is that 2015, there had always been these indicators and I'd been making art and I was kind of drawing on a subconscious level, like things would just come up and I'm like, why the heck is my dad why does he appear in this over and over again? Like, why does he appear when I'm trying to have a relationship with someone? Why does he appear in my art? All this stuff. And I kept having like the same kind of relationships over and over and over again. And of course it was, I was involved with some guy who was connected to some crazy ex who didn't want to let go of that crazy ex. And
Mm.
right. And so I was like replaying apparently some kind of mother-father issue. And when I really started to chant about changing that, that's when all of the memories, Pandora box open, and all of the incest came up with my dad,
Oh,
the molestation, the first sexual assaults when I was 12 and on and on. And at that point, I'm 15 years sober, 16 years sober, and I'm like, I can't handle this, period.
yeah.
And so I had to go in treatment for it and get a lot of support to start that journey of healing from those realizations. And that's when all of the other really deep rooted stuff came up, and the other memories about my mom and stuff that happened with my brother and etc. So
Let me just ask you this. When I look at you, when I talk to you, and this is the second time I think that we've had an in-depth conversation, I mean, I just find it so amazing that having gone through all of that trauma, having gone through all of that deep physical, mental, and emotional pain growing up, how you could be where you are right now with this incredible, photography business and the jewelry that you're making. That I want you to talk about that too, so everybody knows what you're doing with that, because I think it's a beautiful thing that you're contributing to. I mean, how did this happen? I mean, I know it's a lot of work. I know you're still working on it, but do
yeah.
you sometimes look at yourself in the mirror and say, who am I? Or, how did all this happen? And look at where I am now and where I came from. I mean, it's got to be just a little, I don't want to say a little overwhelming, because that's kind of like a contradiction in terms, but it's got to be a lot to process.
Yeah. Well, and I think, because I'm still working on those layers of trauma, I
Hmm.
think, and I'm still working on the perception of myself that, you know, trying to understand like who I truly am. But one thing that really hit me, which, it's been a prayer that I've had for a long time, is like knowing that I've gone through all this stuff, you know, how the heck and what am I going to do with this? Like, how can I turn poison into medicine and take this experience and make something positive out of it? Because I think in my mind, the only way that I can justify having taken this on, I'm kind of a believer that we kind of choose our lessons at
Hmm.
this point. I didn't used to believe that, is that there has to be something positive that can come out of it. And maybe it's just my determination. And it was wild because I've been doing photography for a long time. I started making jewelry when I got out of that PTSD trauma rehab, and I started to learn how to work with my hands, and I started realizing, I started researching like essential oils and crystals and all these things that can really support the process. And it was really in the last year and a half or so that I came up with this idea of like wanting to create a jewelry site for that specifically supports women of all kinds, whether you're trans. Actually, it's going to be any person. I think it's probably the aesthetic is probably a little bit more feminine, but it's towards anyone who struggles with sexual trauma. So it's not only about like beautification and recognizing yourself, but it's also going to be about survivors or like people who have gone through incredible things, sharing their experience, strength, and hope. And then the products are going to be geared towards crystals, combinations, essential oils, or things that just are calming, influential, and supportive. And I can't say that a crystal would ever fix someone's problem, but what I can say is that there are products that can support people in their process. That would be a goal. But most importantly, part of the proceeds of all jewelry sales are going to be going towards organizations that support survivors, who've gone through sexual trauma, have gone through abuse. I've had help from other organizations from my own experience, and I want to be able to give that back. I feel like it's really important. Again, it's how do you get out of the ditch yourself? Like what motivates you to get out of the ditch? And for me, it's like, okay, if I can get out of this and help someone else, then this will be worth it, and I want to be able to do that. And that piece of it is still in the making. And I've really kind of, I've gone through some challenges because of COVID. And so now I'm coming out of that and I'm reaffirming and rededicating myself to building that. And but then an interesting thing happened too, where I had the opportunity to be doing portraiture again with the photography. And, and there's something about having someone who is terrified, who comes in the room, like, and I will just say that I think I've only had one client, like out of all the 70 people I photographed in the, since last June, who came in like nonchalant, like, sure, whatever. Like, really.
And I'm guessing I know her. I think she's a friend of mine.
Actually, she was a little bit nervous too.
Oh my gosh, I'm so surprised. Okay.
But once she got in there and got rolling, that's when it was really fun. But it's so beautiful because I think that through my own experiences of like eating disorder and all this stuff and like self-image, I was like, wow, there's so many people who struggle with this too. Just this piece alone, like you don't even have to have gone through trauma to be, influenced by the media. And, it's like, there's a reason why they started studying how magazine affects our psychology and eating disorders. And, and so, but what I discovered in myself there is that no matter what was going on in my life, as soon as someone stepped into that office space or we're about to initiate our studio experience, is that I was all about just making them comfortable and making them feel supported and safe and like, it's okay. And the strange thing was that a lot of people with different types of trauma did start coming through my door. And, and those were some interesting opportunities because when I was living in California, I did start doing spiritual counseling work. And then I got certified in Reiki, Asui Reiki and Angel Reiki 1 and 2. And I started working with people and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can totally pinpoint, struggles or things that they're, like auric blocks or, and all the stuff that I've learned over the years from these incredible energy healing practitioners. I was like, it's at my disposal now. It's like the experience of learning that has made me capable of being able to support others. So then, and I've worked here in Colorado too, and mostly I'm just available private business now. But, when I had these women coming in, I had 2 breast cancer survivors. I had a woman who had been traumatized by her mother, about photos and was so deathly afraid to be in front of there. And, there were opportunities to do some Reiki work and to, or people embarking on, getting out into the love life again, and add some stuff they're carrying from past relationships. So we've done a lot of clearing in that studio.
That's truly amazing. That really, truly is amazing. And even, I saw on your website something that you said that you believe that there is an inherent beauty and strength in each and every one of us, which is something I firmly believe, that there's an incredible amount of power just waiting to come out, but you're able to capture that in a portrait and with your photography. And that just, I thought was so amazing and so beautiful. And I know a lot of people have such issues with body image. I know that. I mean, I experience it myself. And I know a lot of it is from what we hear from society and the media and advertising and all of that kind of stuff and junk that, is thrown at us. But I've seen other people that when they see a photograph of themselves that was done well, I mean, it completely changes their life.
There have been some really beautiful moments. And that's when I started to more reaffirm that, what, photography, even if we're doing energy sessions in the process or whatever, like this is a way that I can help people see that, connect with that. And I remember this beautiful woman, Lucy, who was 80 years old, and we photographed her and she was like, oh my gosh, I can't have this. But then we started joking around and I was making her pretend like she's at a bar waiting for a sailor, saw a sailor come in, and then she started doing her philosophical movements. She had these beautiful, anyway, she was just so much fun. I spent so much time with her. And when we were looking at the photos, she just basically stopped and just held her hands on her face. And she said, oh my God, is that really me? And I was like, welcome to my world of perception, my dear, and it's like, And I love it too, because it's actually really gratifying, and to be able to and some people really, really struggle. It's such a struggle,
Mhm.
but if we can get those photos where they can see like, oh, I do like that about, oh, I like that look in myself, or
Mhm.
some people who come in who are like, oh, I hate having my photo taken. I've never liked any photo. And I'm like, perfect. I'm the perfect person for you. And then we're going through the photos and we're flagging which ones, are going to make it to the next round. And they're like flagging 75% of that. Or we're like, well, I'd say we did pretty good then. What did you? And they're like, well, yeah. They're always a little bit surprised.
So
It's really
basically,
fun
you,
though.
you love a challenge.
I do. I do. Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? It's because of that. It's because of that inherent belief. Like, I know, even these people that harm me and stuff too and created all this harm, like every single person has a beauty in them, has a spark within them that can be tapped into, and maybe it's, having some experience with certain types of personalities too have given me
Mhm.
a lot of empathy and space, for people who struggle.
Well, that
So
statement in itself just speaks to the amount of healing that you've been able to accomplish. I mean, that's a very forgiving and loving statement.
yeah, it doesn't mean that I don't set boundaries, and it means that it doesn't mean that I have to be physically involved with those parties, but I
Mhm.
will say that acknowledging that piece of it gives me a little bit more peace,
Mm.
and it gives me a little bit more hope, because the one thing that I don't want to do, and as I mentioned earlier, like I'm still in this process. I have stuff I just processed this morning before we're recording this.
Oh,
And I
great.
was like, oh my gosh, can I even do this podcast today? I don't know. I'm gonna try. So then that made me sweat too. But we were talking about me sweating earlier. Anyway,
But you're doing great. And I just have to ask you, how do you feel now after being on
I
air for a while?
I feel like it's good to be able to tell my story.
Mhm.
Um, I think one thing that I don't want to be perceived as a victim. And
Mhm.
because I struggle with falling into victimizing tendencies, and sometimes I just get batches of stuff that come in my life where I just feel betrayed over and over and over again.
Mhm.
And but I just have to put it out there. I'm like, every single person, and this is a reminder for myself too, is equally worth of love and support. And one the biggest lessons that I've learned from this family stuff is that, especially after interacting with my mom, lately, and I had to take a break recently just because I couldn't hold myself together, but to realize that people who have been traumatized tend to traumatize others,
Mm.
right? And
Mhm.
so, and sometimes it's really hard when people are being mean or throwing things in your face or whatever, but I have to remember that they've gone through stuff too, and
Mhm.
maybe they don't know, maybe they don't understand. And I think if I can keep working on getting to that perspective, then that will help me overall in the long run.
Mhm. Well, and I think that even by you telling your story, number one, it's so hard to be able to tell your story, especially when it is that personal and painful. But it actually is part of the healing process is to be able to share it. And I can tell you now, everybody who listens to this is going to either be able to connect with it and understand, or they know somebody who's had a similar story. So I think by sharing our stories, is a way that we can actually give hope to other
Mm,
people and have that same feeling of I am not alone and I can heal from anything. And that's another one of the reasons why I do this show is because I talk to so many wonderful people who've really had a lot of bumps in the road of life, let's just put it that way, and have come out strong and powerful just like you. I mean, I'm so impressed with everything that you're doing and I can't wait for you to photograph me.
I, I can't wait either. I'm so excited. We have so many ideas.
I know. And I have to tell you this, this is, I come from a tribe that has the exact opposite experience. I have four sisters, and out of the five of us, and now even my nieces are like this too. Anytime someone sees a camera, boy, we're on. It could be at a party, it could be at a family gathering, it can just be taking a walk. We see a camera, and all of a sudden, we start posing. It's just crazy.
It's really funny. I just want to go walk around with you and like hold a camera and see what you do.
Well, sometimes it's not pretty, but it is fun.
I think it sounds like fun. I say we go to Boulder, walk up and down the street.
Ooh.
We'll talk about that after. I do want to say though that I appreciate that validation. I think I know in a one-on-one situation I can share and I can connect with people and I can empathize. You know, I can't speak for the other person's experience ever, but I do know that from my perspective, when people have reached out to me or people, when I hear other people's stories of strength and hope, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, you went through that too and you got through it. Oh my gosh, you were able to stop binging and purging. Oh my gosh, how'd you do that? You know, it's like those give me courage to feel like maybe something could be a little bit different.
Mhm.
And so if there's any chance, you know, that could be a, you know, foundation for this too, that'd be
Mhm.
beautiful. And I think it's amazing that you're able to perceive that and the line of messaging that you're bringing into your podcast, because I think this kind of heart-centered, you know, realization that we're humans and we have struggles, right? It's kind of what I feel like it's what we need right now in this
Mhm.
society. You know, it's about digging in a little bit deeper and realizing that, you know what, I'm not alone here and neither are they. And maybe this is the time to just get honest and be more truthful about where we're at, you know?
I think that's a great point because a lot of people are suffering and a lot of people are isolated or feeling isolated. And, you
Yeah.
know, it's a way to be able to reach out, you know, and just hold somebody's hand, even if it is virtually, you know, and know that people care.
Hmm. I'm sending everyone who's struggling a virtual hug right now.
Aw, that's so sweet. Now, how can people get a hold of you? How can they find you or where can they find you?
Well, telepathic message. No, just kidding. No, don't bombard me. Send it through the inbox. It's funny though. I do like, because I am an intuitive as well. Like I do pick up on a lot of stuff. It's really kind of funny. But so I've got my photography website, which is Laura J Photography, and so you can send me a regular message, or if you want to book a session. I typically recommend that people contact me first so we can talk about your needs. Because if we need to, you know, get a specific type of space for that, or maybe we need to look at the weather or whatever, I just think it's good to have a conversation first. So yeah, people can get a hold of me through there. I have an Instagram page set up for Indigo J and Co. And so that's going to be the website that is offering products that really whose sales benefit survivors of this process. And then yeah, I think those are probably, I would say you can follow me on there. You can contact me through my Facebook. I do have one for Laura J Photography as well. Yeah, so either that or my website.
Okay. And LinkedIn. You are on LinkedIn.
Oh, yep, I'm on LinkedIn too as Laura J. Yep,
Okay.
Jaye.
If people can't find you, they're just not looking.
If you search Laura Jaye, like
Mhm.
in Google, you know, like anything photography or like that, like a bunch of sites will come up related to that.
Do you have any final words of wisdom or pearls of wisdom that you would like to share?
You know, I just want to say that I am not perfect in this process by any means, and I too still struggle. And I would say that the thing that keeps me on the surface is like realizing when that there are other people who are struggling too.
Mhm.
And so when I feel so good in life, I get to reach out and support others. So I would say if you're struggling, reach out and connect with someone else. Like make sure people know that you're hurting and you need support, but also reach out to someone else who's struggling or volunteer or find something meaningful to do. You know, and if people are struggling with trauma, you know, getting out there and grounding and orienting where you really kind of like get yourself looking in your environment and realize I'm in the here, I'm in the now, like I'm okay. It's not happening right now, you know, but
Mhm.
definitely reach out for support. And I can definitely provide, you know, some links as well for people who've been helpful to me in the process.
Oh,
But
that'd
I
be
just really
great.
appreciate being here and I appreciate your grace and your like positivity. You're such a beautiful, like you're a combination of like marigold and sunflower all in one. Whew. So
Thank
thank you for
you.
everything that you do and just, you know, being open to hearing my story as well. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much for the kind words. That's very sweet, but my husband might not always agree with you about that.
Sometimes we got to test them, make sure they're still growing.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a really good point. Well, thanks again, Laura.
Uh-huh.
You're just wonderful. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
being here.
Thank
And,
you.
and everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And make sure you do check out Laura's website. Make sure you check out her jewelry. This woman is an amazing person. I absolutely love her. So just remember to pay attention to yourself. If you're struggling with anything, just reach out. There's no shame in asking for help. Make sure that you connect with other people and try and find a way, if you are suffering, to be able to share your story, because not only will it help you recover, it'll help you kind of work through a lot of things. You can help a lot of other people as well. And that is the way of the Femininja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the Femininja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.